This is a bit of a wild card. I was following the Rejoin party who were leafleting and seeing if I could catch anyone in the street after they'd finished their discussions on the doorstep. And this, they just delivered these leaflets, which I'm pleased to have contributed to a couple of the headlines on this. The only serious candidate and former Conservative MEP. So they've actually used what I suggested to them in terms of developing their pitch. Anyway, they delivered this and this leaflet to a household, and they'd walked off up the road, and I was sort of mooching around, and this guy, probably 70, 75, thin as a rake, came out on the street and just sort of tore them into shreds. He was swearing and shouting his head off. So I naturally, of course, went over to see him. Uh, and I said, what's the problem? He says, I ain't fucking voting for these fucking blah, blah, blah. I probably can't say any of these words on YouTube because they'll ban the video. But he was effing and jeffing about the whole thing. I said, well, what's the problem then? And he said, I've hate this bloody election and I always voted for Farage. Never again, never again, he's going. This is just a complete farce. In fact, he lived two doors up from the woman who said much the same for a completely different set of reasons, I have to say. But he was completely hating Farage now for running this election. He says, never in a million years will I vote for that. See you next Tuesday. And so, so I thought, well, do I run now? So I said, what's the problem with this then? He said, this is the lot, he said, tourists, not immigrants. I said, what? I don't think it says that. No, he says, they're worse than Farage, this lot. I said, I don't think they are. I said, I think they're, I said, the guy is an ex-Tory MEP. I said, he's not a member of the far right. And he was going on about it, he wouldn't have it. And this went on for about 10 minutes. And in the end, he shook me hand. He said, I'm so grateful you came round to talk to me. It turned out that he'd mistook John Stevens here for Kai Stevens, who thinks Hitler was a bit soft. So they've got a leaflet saying, we want tourists, we don't want effing immigrants. So he's further along the curve than Nigel. And he had mixed up the two candidates. What does this prove? 34 candidates. It's desperately difficult for anyone to work out what's going on. But the interesting thing was, this man was a dyed-in-the-wool Nigel Farage fanatic who was no longer a fanatic because of this stunt that he's pulled. And it was more or less over his dead body and various other things. He was not going to vote for Nigel. But he had confused these people with the far right, I think they should be called. So that's a disappointment. They both called Stevens, unfortunately. So if you vote in Clacton, make sure you get the right Stephen.